Today's episode is brought to you by Achieve Unite, a global leader in leadership development, business acceleration, and trusted partnerships. Achieve Unite combines deep expertise, data analytics, and AI to help companies accelerate revenue, control costs, elevate talent, and build trust. They're more than advisors. They deliver results with their proven three-part approach: talent development, ecosystem strategy, and profitable growth programs. Whether you're strengthening alliances, enhancing internal systems, or optimizing your partner ecosystem, Achieve Unite is the partner you need for success. Welcome to the Delighted Customers Podcast. I am so glad you're here. We challenge conventional thinking about customer experience because I believe that improving experiences isn't just good for business, it's a powerful way to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Each week, we feature thought-provoking conversations with industry thought leaders from a variety of backgrounds, offering unique perspectives and actionable insights. Get ready to sharpen your leadership and transform your approach to customer experience. Let's dive in. Well, today on the Delighted Customers Podcast, we are going to hit a tangential subject to what we can do to delight customers, and we have to ensure that our employees are doing well. We have to make sure those people serving the customers that we have, whatever they are, patients, guests, passengers, whatever they are, those people, that group of people is doing well, because we know that the customer experience will never exceed the employee experience. So with that, I want to invite back on the show Leah Marone. Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me back.
Yeah, so did that make sense, what I said about the customer experience will never surpass the employee experience?
You know, I was just going to actually ask you, can you add a little more to that? Because I love where you're going with that. Just add a little bit more for us.
Yeah, so it's like you're interviewing me at the outset here. Let's do that, and then I'm going to ask you to tell the audience a little bit more about your background. Okay, so there was a study done, a lot of CX people are probably familiar with it, a while back, called the Service Profit Chain, which was originally an article in the Harvard Business Review, which 3 Harvard professors ended up writing a whole book on it, actually 2 books on it, the Value Profit Chain, the Service Profit Chain. And essentially what it said, that chain starts with the strategy the company has about who it's going to serve and what it's going to do and what its mission is, the strategy. The next thing in the chain is the employees, right? The people who are going to deliver on that. The third group in the chain are the customers, and the fourth group in the chain are the business outcomes that they want to achieve. And so what they did was they did this study, and I'm not going to go deep into it because it's a show we're going to feature you on, but it does kind of frame out the why of why this is such an important topic, which I'm going to ask you to expand on for us. But so they studied, let's just take a company like State Farm Insurance, which has locations all over the U.S. The study was done probably several decades ago, but my guess is there's not a whole lot of difference other than, the in-office piece of it is maybe a little bit differently because things are structured a little differently today. But what they found was those locations that had the best employee experience ratings almost across the board exceeded the performance of those with less than okay employee ratings. So there was better customer metrics, and then that ultimately led to better business outcomes. Consistently throughout, whether you looked at a mid-sized city, Milwaukee and Pittsburgh in the same category, no matter how you sliced it, it always the outcomes were always the same, in that those locations that had better employee experiences had better customer outcomes. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes. So now, with that lengthy setup for today's show, Leah, could you please share with the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of a little bit about your background and what you're doing now?
Sure. So I am a psychotherapist by trade. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And my clinical practice, I mainly specialize in treating anxiety disorders, along with mood disorders. I also love working with athletes on performance anxiety issues. I played Division I basketball, and I was kind of a mess when it came to just balancing my inner critic and all the things. And so I have a sweet spot for that. And then on the other side of kind of what I do is more consulting. And that entails speaking, that entails facilitating workshops, that entails like just working one-on-one with leaders and how to impact culture, integrate mental health, mental wellness, and kind of the employee experience to prevent turnover, prevent burnout, to prevent just kind of the negative toxicity, components that sometimes just derail a culture completely. And so I love the diversity and kind of what I'm doing in the different levels, the macro level of speaking and writing, and then kind of that micro intimate level of just therapy and consulting. But really it's all under the umbrella of helping people generate self-awareness, helping to really advocate and educate and support and empower leaders in particular how to integrate not only wellness and mental health in their worlds, but also their teams.
Yeah, which is such important work. And there's already a gem. I like to stop and pull out the gems for the audience, at least the ones I'm hearing. You, hopefully, if you're listening, you're hearing, these plus more. But the one in particular that you and I do have in common, as you shared, as a former Division I, I know you play basketball player. You had a lot of inner critic activity going on, and I have that too, and also just the empathy that you have for people who are athletes who also may be suffering for that same kind of thing. A big part of my mission here with the Delighted Customers podcast, the work I do at Michigan State, and the masterclass I teach are all about trying to lift up that CX professional who is trying to make change in their organization and hitting all sorts of headwinds. And the stress and anxiety you go through, people have it no matter what occupation they're in, but I have a heart for those people, and I try to do whatever I can through people like you. I mean, you're probably the most direct help. I'm teaching them about things like how to gain trust from key stakeholders and how to build certain models and frameworks, but direct help on the stress and anxiety. So people have it no matter what their profession is, and I so appreciate you having a heart to help people, given, sometimes, I say God doesn't waste our suffering. If we listen and we do something with it, and I appreciate your empathy for what you're doing.
Oh, thanks. And it's so interesting because I think just this whole movement and, the buzzwords around which, self-care and this and that. And a lot of people now are getting to the point sometimes where there is the eye roll, because I think we've heard when we think about burnout, when we think about self-care and all these things that have really been talked about at length in the last several years, which again is a good thing. But I think where people are identifying that where it's not helpful is that a lot of times we're just talking on the surface level of what are the coping skills we should be doing. And I have found that most of us could regurgitate a lot of those ourselves, of just make sure you're, doing this and getting sleep and taking walks and take a bath and do this. And so a lot of us know these tangible, concrete things that we should be doing. And what I'm really interested in is getting to the psychological components of, yes, we know what we should be doing. And even come Saturday or Sunday when we create this amazing plan for ourselves that starting Monday, we're going to start our workout and we're going to omit this from our diet and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. There's another part of us a lot of times that surfaces on Monday morning when that alarm goes off and is motivated by a different thing. Maybe like, we didn't sleep well, and we know if we don't sleep well, we're not going to really be firing on all cylinders, and we're really warm, and we don't want to be cranky, and so we'll save our workout for the next day. And so it's really about not just knowing what these tactics and coping skills are, essentially, but really understanding the internal workings of what stands in the way of executing them. And what gets in the way of them being consistent. And a lot of times that is our critic, that's our internal rescuer, that's our internal pleaser, and a lot of these different parts that sometimes don't align. And so when we think about mental health, when we think about leadership, when we think about all these things, it's really the basis is self-awareness. The basis is putting in that work to not just succumb to Band-Aids and pacifiers and these quick fixes. It's really about kind of understanding the inner workings and as a leader, what you're modeling.
So I do want to dig into that a little bit because it is a trap that we fall into, this cycle that you described, that we actually have to, number one, as you say, be aware, I think, is the first step, that we're even falling into it or falling back into it. And then two, putting in some sort of stopgap measure to say, I don't want to do this anymore. I need to take a new path. I know you're working on a big project to push out a book, and the topic around which is support, don't solve, empowering leaders to create authentic spaces. And you just mentioned leaders modeling. So first, talk about what are some of the problems or the ways that leaders lead that is the opposite of creating authentic spaces and also solving.
Yes, great questions. And I think too, the title and kind of the whole premise of this is serial fixer. Are you a serial fixer? Are you someone that is, constantly when you're hearing something and the role that you find yourself in conversations, whether they're professional or personal, does your mind immediately go to fixing and solving? And these are not just these concrete, interactions of like, where's this or what's this? I'm talking about interactions, especially that leaders find themselves in often, where there is an opportunity to empower. There's an opportunity to maintain a role that is supportive and not in a solving form. Because what that does, and what I've found, is that when, we may have the right answers, we may give amazing advice, but people don't take it if they don't have their own flavor, if they don't maintain ownership, and if we don't also acknowledge that we all come from different paths and different, all these different things and different associations. And so sometimes when we find ourselves as parents, as leaders, as friends, as partners, that we're in this role where we are kind of feeding advice, feeding information. I don't know about you, but sometimes the frustration that can come with that when people don't take it and people then, mess up or botch it again. And it's just like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm having the same conversation, or I feel like these people, I can't lead them because they're doing X, Y, and Z. When ultimately it's not about pushing harder. It's about taking a step back and actually gaining more self-awareness and utilizing that EQ to understand that, am I taking more of almost like a coaching mentality where I am being that supporter and not that solver? And this takes a different level of patience and a different level of actually being an effective listener, which it's fascinating to me how many people actually subscribe to or think of themselves as, oh, I'm a fantastic listener. But oftentimes we find that our brain is so conditioned to relate the information we're hearing just to us, like, oh yeah, that happened to me 3 years ago, or let me tell you about a time when I was in that position. And we immediately relate it to us, which is normal human, we have these associations, but we're giving that advice, we're making these associations or tailoring it back to us too prematurely. When instead, if we think about being a supporter rather than a solver, the first step out of the gate is validation. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting because when I've done couples therapy, and I don't do much of it because it's exhausting, I'll just be honest with you. But when I do sometimes take some couples and work with that, it's interesting to ask them, when I say the word validation, what do you think of? What do I mean? And 9 out of 10 people will often say something along the lines of agreeing. Like, I have to validate that. I have to agree. I have to, basically say, you're right. And I love to, challenge that and say, really, the validation is just the nonverbal and verbal communication that you are basically, that you're letting that person know that I am making an effort to understand the message, the information, the emotion that you are trying to express. Mm-hmm. You may not agree with any of it. You may think I subscribe to something completely different, or I didn't see it at all that way. But if we want to continue to work collaboratively, if we want to continue to, move in this fork in the road rather than, again, being the solver, this fixer, let's give advice, and these imbalanced relationships and sometimes codependent relationships, it's about first understanding that we have to kick into this mode where we're listening and we're validating to remove ourselves from taking false ownership and being that solver. It's about understanding and giving each other the respect of, I am trying to focus and listen and validate what you are trying to communicate. I think we miss that often in a lot of our relationships, personal and professional.
So what you're saying is it's natural for us to say, oh yeah, I remember a time when I went through something like that. It's natural to kind of join in with someone, and it may even be natural. We talk about how we're trained from elementary school to raise your hand and have the right answer when the teacher, asks the question. So the reward is to raise your hand and have the right answer first. And so you're jumping to solution. Right? And what you're saying is the antithesis of that is really to get forward in the long term as you're leading someone. You need to, whether it's bite your tongue, but retrain and validate first what they're saying, even if you don't agree with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And validation can come in several forms, where it could be that head nod, it could be that eye contact, where you're basically confirming, like, trying to do my best and put forth effort to understand and listen and stay present, right? We can tell when the wheels are turning elsewhere and someone's focused on something else or multitasking, right? It's also, it comes sometimes in the form of paraphrasing. It comes sometimes in the form of just like, no, that sounds like this has been on your mind for a while, or yeah, no, this is a big project. Just even setting that tone of collaboration and keeping the ownership with that person. I think the best leaders I've worked with are able to do that. And what that does is I think it not only diffuses some of the urgency culture that I think many of us just subscribe to anyway, that isn't effective, and it just is a perfect, kind of component to, I think, burnout and the inability to recover and reset. But it also, again, creates these, I like to say, and maybe it's too clinical, but these micro-codependencies when we see in the workforce. We see people that can, immediately identify, oh, well, this person, if I, have a question, they're actually probably just going to do it. Or they'll talk to so-and-so for me. Or they'll tell me step by step what I need to do. Or if I come and kind of say how stressed I am, they'll pick up the pieces for me. And this isn't a vindictive, malicious kind of move, but we all are stretched for time. And so sometimes keeping the ownership and challenging and validating and asking certain questions of, like, what do you feel like your next step is? Or how can I support you on this? Or what are your concerns? Those questions as a leader keeps that ownership and the ability for your team member to gain confidence, gain repetitions, and to build their own muscle around things. And I don't think we're seeing that enough. We're seeing people swoop in. We're seeing people kind of fix and solve. And I think that right there is also a big cultural component of people not feeling a purpose in the work, not feeling passion with their role, because they're not owning it. They're not improving. They're not getting the reps. They're not gaining the confidence that make us feel good and included in whatever we're doing as humans.
That is powerful stuff. So the first step is validation. Validating the other person. Don't jump to the solution. Don't give them the answers. But even if you may be well-intentioned, even if you think you know the answer. I know the answer. But you're not really developing that person's independence or interdependence. So what is the second step? Once you've validated, okay, I hear you, got it, sounds like you've really been frustrated with that issue. What's the second step?
Right. It does. It's kind of interwoven. And the second step is that kind of that empathy, if it's warranted, right? And again, we're not talking gushy-feely here. We're not talking about having many therapy sessions with your people. But it's again, we talk about the buzzwords, empathetic leader. We talk about, inviting letting people fail, it's okay, or, invite the risks, all these things, which are wonderful taglines, wonderful phrases. They should be integrated into your culture, but we don't know how to do it. And this is one way to do it, where you validate, you understand the message, you create that space for someone to share and process. And then there is that sometimes that bit of empathy, where it is like, it doesn't again have to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but it can still be just like, no, that's a lot, or the deadline is coming up. Now I can see where the stress is there. So it's kind of aligning, and that's sometimes where you can show and I think pull out the emotion that might be involved in what they're sharing. Because there always is some, whether it's stress, whether it's a bit of that, am I going to do this? I am not capable of this. Am I going to get in trouble? All those things that sometimes are behind the messages when someone comes to you. And then we do kind of have, and again, different level of skill. I've worked with so many leaders that are so great at this, but that next step after empathy is inquire. And that's when you do ask some of those questions where, again, you may know exactly what this person should do, but that's when you can kind of give them a platform to ask questions such as, what do you feel like your options are at this point? Who do you need to talk to? What can I help you with? Is there something tangible? Like these questions that are stimulating kind of that growth, that are stimulating the processing, rather than someone coming in and you just kind of giving them a step-by-step, well, this is what you do and this is how you execute. So it's that inquiring too, where you can add your, kind of your flavor of, this is how I coach, this is how I lead. And that's when people, I think, really can benefit from examples. Like, hey, would it be helpful if I shared something when I was in this? Would that be helpful? I think that's when sometimes, we can share experiences, but I think asking that permission sometimes is helpful too, because it keeps that ownership and it keeps the momentum with that person.
So inquire, and could that include something like, Ed, how big do you see this problem? Is it like smaller than a bread box? Is it like an up all night, all month kind of an issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And kind of, sometimes people come in with a lot of narratives that are pretty negatively tinted, or just kind of there's that defeat. There's, a lot of things. You have people too that are just kind of like, no, everything's great, and kind of masking things. But I think as a leader, then that is when you can inquire about stuff like that. That is when you can also pull from a strengths-based perspective and think about things that they've gotten through already, things that, when they have been resourceful. And if you're working with someone that it's almost like you're hitting dead ends and they're like, I don't know what to do, or I'm incredibly stressed, or so-and-so's not pulling their weight, or this and that and this. Again, it's circled back to that validation of like, yeah, it's really hard to collaborate. But, this is something too that you're growing with. Like, this is something too, like, let's look at what your options might be. It might be uncomfortable, but what are the next steps? And again, it's allowing them to get those processing skills that many of us, even just developmentally and growing up, we didn't get that. We may have had parents that just weren't present. We may have had parents that did solve it all for us. And so sometimes those reps were not acquired throughout, youth and our early days. We had people that came in and fixed and solved and coddled, and we need to gain that resilience.
All right, so that's great advice. What I've got is the first step is validation, then we're moving to empathy, then inquire. Mm-hmm. Is there a step after inquire?
Yeah, and again, these aren't all sometimes in the same conversation, right? It depends on the topic and what's going on. But the next step is motivate, right? That is when it's not just kind of these motivating gloss over statements like, you got this. I mean, I think it's more so, again, as I started to say, that strengths-based perspective. It's pulling from, well, let's look at, have you felt this before? Have you been in this type of situation before? Have you been anticipating a conversation that's uncomfortable before? What did that look like? How was that? It's really helping them collect data, identify their own patterns, identify options, but with that motivational kind of empowering twist to it. And I think, a lot of leaders, I've heard when I've done just different group sessions and Q&As, it's funny because I've had some team members say, I've worked with some leaders where they come from a good place, but sometimes they will say very empowering statements such as like, don't worry about it, you got it, you always deliver. And as much as sometimes those are nice, it's also they feel kind of just glossed over of like, all right, move on, figure it out, where they're not getting that kind of that space created that they might need. And I think that's a big part of it. So it's again, there's a lot of room and wiggle room for, there's these steps, but I think to add who you are and kind of tap in again to being authentic as a leader. And so it is, we have the validate, the empathy, the inquire, motivate, and then that last step is reconnect. And again, this can take a lot of different forms, but if, you are leading and working with someone, and you've had some touch points, you've had some meetings, one-to-ones, I think it's always helpful to, whether it is in the form of a quick email, whether you see them, you're in the office, to just kind of touch point and reconnect. Like, how are you doing with that? How'd that go? How are your next steps doing? And that's helpful. Or it's even at the end of the one-to-one or when you're meeting to say, hey, let's reconnect on this when we meet next week or when we meet next month, or what would be helpful. I think that right there too radiates support. That right there radiates that I'm not coddling you, I'm not doing this, but I also do care about you, and I care about, what you're producing, what you're collaborating on, the steps that you're doing that not only help us from a data and numbers perspective, but also we want to keep you. We want you to feel part of this team and feel supported. And I think that human component is amazing. And you think about that even personally when you've maybe shared something with someone, whether it's a neighbor or family member, and you maybe get that text the next few days like, hey, how are you doing? Or I've been thinking about you. How did that go? That feels great. And not that you have to be incredibly vulnerable and share everything, but sometimes those touch points and that human additive of, these aren't just one and done things. I think that makes a big difference culturally.
Okay, beautiful. So I've got validate, inquire, empathy, motivate, and then reconnect.
Yeah.
As the steps. Would you be willing to coach me? I'm going to create some fictitious role play so that people can get an illustration of how the pros do it. So I'm an employee, and I'm going to come to you with an issue, and I'm going to... Actually, let's first do it. Let's have some fun. Let's do it the wrong way.
Okay.
So you're gonna. Hey, Leah, I've got this big issue with Ron. Ron thinks he's the king of the world and has been getting in my way. He's in marketing, and we need information from them to do our job because we're tasked with, deadlines and numbers. We got to hit deadlines and numbers. And how am I supposed to get what I need to do my job when he keeps putting up a blockade against us? So I'm really at the end of my rope here. I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do.
Oh, Ron again. I mean, I've heard about Ron 4 times in the last 3 weeks. I'm just going to have to handle this by myself. Who's his direct lead? Like, I need to get with them. I'll figure this out. I mean, this is just, you don't know how many times I've have to deal with things like this, but I'll figure it out, and in the meantime, you need to stand your ground. You just need to stand your ground. And I will throw the hammer where I can.
Okay. I'll let him know I'm not taking any crap. And then you can get with Sylvia, his boss, and we're good to go, right?
We're good to go.
All right. Thanks. So that, folks, that's how not to do it. All right. I'm going to rerun that now with the using the correct model and give you folks a chance. So I'm going to come to you again with the same issue. Hey, Leah, I'm just really banging my head against the wall with Ron and marketing. We need information. As you know, we need the data from them to get our job done. And I just keep getting put off. I keep getting the hand. And it's really frustrating. I'm losing sleep. I don't know what else to do.
Yeah. No, I mean, Mark, I can see where that would be frustrating, especially when you have deadlines to meet and you're trying to work collaboratively and it just doesn't sound like it's happening. Yeah. What can you tell me more about just timelines with this or what you've maybe tried?
So, we have this project that's due at the end of the month. I've been spending the last 5 or 6 weeks to get a sense of where they are with their data because we need it. to do what we need to do. And I keep getting, well, first I'm not hearing anything. And then finally it gets back and said, we're working on it. And I kind of just let him know when our deadline was. And doesn't seem to make a difference. Like I'm not getting anything solid back.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So again, it sounds like it's taking up a lot of space then, and you're stewing on this and carrying a lot of the weight of it all, right?
Huge. I mean, I'm so frustrated with it because I don't understand it. Like, this is serving our organization. It's in alignment with our goals. Obviously, it's affecting our customers. Mm-hmm. If we don't have this data, and I'm really worried about it, and it's affecting my job.
Yeah. So obviously I can tell you've thought quite a bit about it. I'm curious, Mark, like what are you've tried some different tactics. What do you feel like at this stage? I know you're coming to me and I'm glad we're having this conversation, but what do you feel like at this stage other options might be? Or let's even just look at like Ron's, why there might be some resistance. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I know he's got to get some information from the vendor. So it could be that there's an issue with him getting data from the vendor, but he knew when we needed this information. So it's really frustrating to me that he couldn't work it out with the vendor by now. I don't know. One time in the past, I had an issue with accounting, and I just sat down. I took him to coffee, and I sat down with them, and I explained what was going on, and I found out it was something totally different that I didn't even think it was. And we were able to overcome that hurdle. Okay,
that was a great option. Have you thought about maybe trying that or something similar, or maybe, to your point, finding out a bit more information, which I know takes time, and I know that's of the essence, but have you tried to experiment that a bit with Ron?
I haven't tried that. I'm just worried that he thinks I'm going to be hassling him, and I'm not. We just need to get this done.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're absolutely right. We need to get this done. There is a deadline, and this is your role, and it is, it's his role as well. And I'm wondering at this stage, I think it sounds like you have identified maybe an option or two. What do you feel like you would need from me if you tried to execute some of those things and gathered some more information? What would be helpful, for me to help support you?
Well, I guess I could take him to coffee. If he's willing to go, and just find out if there's anything more that I'm not aware of, and find out what he says. And I guess I need to gather a little bit more information. When I have that information, maybe, you and I could sit down and talk about next steps.
Yeah, I think so. And I think just, you have to remember too that, Mark, you historically, with this team, you do have a way of communicating to people and creating that kind of collaborative effort. And it feels like the efforts that you're making with him now, they aren't working. So I like that you're willing to take maybe an extra step, which I know takes time, but to gather a bit more information and try to connect with him on a different level and go from there before we kind of start pulling out and kind of identifying other options. So utilize that strength that you do have. Yeah. And I'm happy to circle back with you on that. I think, take some stabs at that and see what you come up with, and we'll definitely revisit it.
Okay. Let's do that. I appreciate your willingness to sit down again after I talk to him.
Of course.
Yeah. So, folks, that's how a pro does it. And you should try this at home.
It's interesting because it does take a little bit more time. You have to build a muscle with it as a leader. But you'll see that so many times, even that first example of where it was like, I'll just handle it. This is enough. I was showing you my aggravation. I was sharing with you, like, shit's going on behind the scenes. And I was probably divulging a bit too much, even with my tone and what was happening, which you're going to take away, which might jolt another type of anxiety within you. Like, things are not great. Like, what's happening? And that's not good either. So it's keeping that, keeping your cool, finding out more information, and really the first example was I absorbed a lot of your issue. Now it affects all of us because you're scared, worried you're not going to make certain deadlines, which then is going to impact me as your leader. But I sucked that in. I took your emotion. I made it, really trigger emotion in me. And then it was one other thing that I had to do on my to-do list. to figure out what I meet with Sylvia, I had to figure out this, I had to go to that. Like, there's another thing. And you can see that that was another interruption that I invited with what I was just doing, right? Mm-hmm. The second example was, yes, it might be a bit slower paced, but what that's going to do is it's going to give you reps to build like some people skills, communication skills, maybe invite a conversation that's a little uncomfortable and see if you can manage that, see if Ron's willing to meet you halfway, maybe you and Ron, just even increase your rapport with each other based on those efforts. And solving that, which increases the collaboration authentically, which increases and gives that a chance. Right? And rather than inviting as a leader this like welcoming of tattling, this welcoming of like, what should I do? Can you do this? Can you do that? Because I think as leaders, that's exhausting. And that's why a lot of people don't want to be leaders. They're like, I just can't handle the people stuff and the drama. And it's like, well, you're inviting it all in and you're taking ownership, where some of that you need to coach and you need to keep the ownership with your team members and be more of that supporter rather than that solver.
Yeah, I love that. And it didn't cost you money, it didn't cost the company money. And in the, I guess one of the issues for a manager or leader is you've got to release some of the control and trust the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that is a hard thing to do, right? Yeah. Especially again, if you are someone, which I know I've dabbled with many times, where you have a vision, a timeline, you have things that you want to control and have people execute, and when they're not delivering, when they're not doing it exactly how you do, sometimes it's really hard to maintain patience and stay the course. But I promise that if you strengthen that muscle and you do think about how can I keep ownership with these people that I'm leading, rather than taking false ownership and almost stock in all of these different things that are perpetuating this sense of urgency, perpetuating and inviting interruptions, it's a game changer. Not only for your own, mental health, clarity, all of the things, but you are also setting boundaries and radiating something that people are picking up on your team. I love to share, it's a little, it relates well, but it's a little not related exactly to kind of, the stage that we were just talking about in the example, but something that I share often is this memory I had of me when I was in grad school. And I can remember like frantically walking down the hall going to my professor's office. And I can remember thinking, oh my God, I have so many questions. This paper's due probably tomorrow and I hadn't started. And so I can remember like almost barging into his office, probably had the look of, anxiety written all over my face and urgency, and I'm talking very fast. And I can remember just saying, hey, I know we have that paper due tomorrow. I have some questions. I was wondering if you can help me out. And, and I basically, was this ball of energy that I wanted to just throw on his desk and let him untangle for me. And I can remember him calmly looking up. He's working on something, and he says, hi, Leah. I can tell what you have to say is really important, but I'm in the middle of something right now, and I can't give you my full attention. So is there a time this afternoon that we can circle back and I can hear what you have to say and answer any questions you might have? And I did not feel the slight, I didn't feel disrespected. I didn't feel dismissed. And what that did and taught me, and I still try to implement it today, is what he did was he did not invite multitasking. He very well could have. He could have said, Leah, oh, hi, Leah. Yeah, still kept working and said, well, you did the last paper, right? I'm sure it'll be fine. Look at the rubric. Yeah, no, I'll see you tomorrow. You'll be great. Yeah, here you go. I would have walked out and been like, ah. Yeah. And he could have very well done that. We do that all the time, right? We give those little empowering statements and people send people on their way and it didn't do anything. But what he did is I met with him later that afternoon, and that 2 to 3 hours that I had before I met with him, logic seeped in. I began to be more prepared about what I asked. I wasn't just all emotion. I came and I was more structured. I thought about it. I kept the ownership with it, and it was way more productive. And I think sometimes as leaders too, it's kind of the old school, like, oh, well, I have the open door policy. And it's like, yeah, well, how's that working for you? Because what you're doing is inviting all these interruptions. It's feeding the ego, thinking that you're serving this purpose, you're putting out fires left and right, when in reality, you're just breeding codependency. You're fixing and solving when people are not getting their own repetitions and getting these experiences and these discomforts to build their own confidence and stamina. And so I think sometimes as leaders, even setting those boundaries of validating, it sounds like you've been giving this a lot of thought. No, I can tell that this is something that you're thinking about. I want to give you my full attention. Let's meet in about 20 minutes after I wrap this up. Or let's find a time where that you could ask me some questions and we can go over that. Keeping that ownership. And that's where you build very purpose-driven, very confident team members that want to stay.
Yeah. Someone once said, sometimes in order to go faster, you need to slow down. And this process may seem, like you said earlier, may take longer in the short run. Mm-hmm. But in the long run, you're training up future leaders who allow your business to scale, right? Because someday Mark's going to be gone. Leah's going to be gone. Mm-hmm. And there's a new group that needs to be equipped and prepared and so on. You're speeding things up because maybe they'll be able to get along well and solve their own questions before it needs to go through yet another step, more people involved, the bureaucracy, whatever it may be, and get something solved so things can move along through the process, right?
Yeah, very well said. And I think it's also, it's okay as a leader, as Brene Brown says, clear as kind. It's okay for you if you as a leader pick up on patterns that this team member is consistently wanting to talk about X, or we talk about this all the time, or they find themselves in this rut all the time, and it's exhausting me. It's a great way to step back as a leader and think, how can I change up how I'm responding, the space that I'm creating? And sometimes it can be highly effective to call out what you're noticing. Hey, I've noticed in the last 3 one-to-ones, these are the things that you're stuck with. These are the things that I feel like you want me to fix for you. What's another way that we can do this and I can help you so that you gain some momentum with this? And being real with those conversations and identifying gaps and patterns to help people gain self-awareness. And that's that vulnerability piece that we're talking about integrating.
Yeah, so many great gems in this episode. We have to land the plane. I want to ask the same question I ask all my guests, but before I do, it occurred to me that it would be important for me to say this, that another benefit of listening to the Delighted Customers podcast is you didn't have to submit a single insurance form to listen to this show, and you got a free session with so many gems from a psychotherapist.
Oh, well,
not just any psychotherapist, but one of the best I know. And what a great 3 words: support, don't solve. Wow, right there is a huge gem. The question, I know I asked you last time you were on the show, but I'm going to ask it again, see if you're at a different place in the river. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Ooh, such a good question. There'd be quite a few things. But the first thing, kind of circling back to that good old inner critic, with everything I've learned, I guess, in the 20 plus years since I've been 20, is I would really I'd tell myself, that inner critic, you want her to stick around. Pay her gratitude and understand that she's working really hard to protect you from certain things that you don't want to feel anymore. But she's working way too hard and she needs a break. And so I would tell myself, rather than trying to shove her down, hate that part of myself, get rid of that part of myself, what's wrong with me, all that self-talk, try to pay gratitude to that part of you. Try to align with it and understand it and work with it. And once I started to do that, because all my anxieties I had as an athlete, they trickled down and reformed as I became a speaker, right? Anxiety, all those kind of things tend to do that, morph with whatever you're doing. And I think I would love to have learned to align and understand that part of me rather than distract and pacify and shove it down. It would serve me way better as an athlete and just as a person trying to figure out what the hell I was doing in my 20s.
Great advice. Great advice. Leah, if people wanted to get a hold of you, their organization needed help with leadership issues, employee-related issues around what you talk about, what's the best way?
My website, which is just leahmarone.com. I have all my contact information there. You can follow me on LinkedIn, and my email is leah@leahmarone.com. So I'd be happy to, answer questions and support where I can.
Leah, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's always so much fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Delighted Customers Podcast. It would mean so much if you would take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts, click on the plus sign or follow button, and that will ensure that you don't miss an episode, and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave a 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday.
At Ritual, we know what goes into the holiday season. The potluck planning, the gift giving, the spreadsheets. So this new year, take a moment for yourself with science-backed support that puts you first. So whether you're focusing on supporting foundational health with a clean vegan multivitamin or supporting your gut health with Symbiotic Plus, do it with 30% off your first month at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.